remember the heartbreak and the heroism of September 11th and the bravery of those who answered the call to defend our country. We remember the volunteers of all ages and all walks of life who came to the Gulf Coast following Hurricane Katrina. And we remember all the people who stepped forward to help others, whether to teach a child to read or to feed a hungry family. And throughout this center, I'm reminded of my husband. I remember the image of George standing amid the rubble of the World Trade Center, his arm around the shoulders of a retired firefighter who had grabbed his old gear to go search for the missing. I remember George standing alone on the pitcher's mound at Yankee Stadium, preparing to throw out the first pitch in New York of the 2001 World Series during that long season of heartbreak and healing. I remember his quiet visits with the families of the fallen, sharing their stories and their tears. And I remember how steadfast and steady he was for 8 years. Since we've been home, I've added new memories. I see George lifting a brush to paint and refurbish a health clinic in the African nation of Zambia. I see George last May on a bike ride with wounded veterans when he hopped off his own bike to help push an Army major who was pedaling with only one leg up the steep hills. My George is a man who, when someone needs a hand, offers him their arms. This is the spirit I hope is forever captured in this beautiful building, that this will always be a place that welcomes each visitor with open arms. Thank you all and welcome.
Ladies and gentlemen, President Jimmy Carter.
Well, it's a great honor for me to be here today, and it reminds me of my favorite cartoon in a New Yorker magazine. This little boy is looking up at his father. He says, "Daddy, when I grow up, I want to be a former president." Well, 4 of us have already made that goal, and one is still working on it, but it is a wonderful thing to be with the other presidents and to have a chance to address this wonderful audience. I'll be very brief, and I'll be limiting my comments just to the things that I know personally that have been important for me and for George W. Bush. In 2000, as some of you may remember, there was a disputed election for several weeks. And finally, when President Bush became president, they had the inauguration in Washington on schedule. And I think my wife and I were the only 2 volunteer Democrats on the platform. And George and Laura afterwards came up and thanked us for coming. And so he said, "Now, if there's anything I can ever do for you, let me know," which was a mistake he made. And I said, "Mr. President, the Carter Center has programs in 35 countries in the world, and the worst problem now is a war going on between North and South Sudan. And millions of people have been killed, and I'd like for you to help us have a peace agreement there." And in a weak moment, he said, "I'll do it." And I said, "When can I meet your Secretary of State and your National Security Advisor?" He said, "Well, I haven't even chosen them yet, but give us 3 weeks." So 3 weeks later, I came up and met with Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice, and President Bush kept his promise. He appointed a distinguished senator from Missouri, John Danforth, and a great general from Kenya named Sumbewo. And in January of 2005, there was a peace treaty between North and South Sudan that ended a war that had been going for 21 years. George W. Bush is responsible for that. And that was the first of his great contributions to the countries in Africa. As has already been mentioned briefly here, he increased the development assistance to Africa from the time he went in office until he left from $1.4 billion to more than $9 billion. And that's an increase of 640%. That is development assistance. He established a PEPFAR program. There were 50,000 HIV sufferers in Africa being treated when he came in office. When he left office per year, 2 million. I'll let you figure the percentage on that. And now at this new institute, he has a program called Pink Ribbon, Red Ribbon, and he's to save women from cervical and breast cancer in sub-Saharan Africa. And that's, again, is something that's dear to my heart, and I know means a lot to millions of people in Africa. So, Mr. President, let me say that I'm filled with admiration for you and deep gratitude for you about the great contributions you've made to the most needy people on earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, buddy. Very thoughtful. Thank you. I'm very proud of you.
Ladies and gentlemen, President George H.W. Bush.
Right there. It's on there. Yep, hold on a second. Hold on for a minute.
Thank you all very much. What a beautiful day in Dallas. It's a great pleasure to be here. They honor our son, our oldest son, and this is very special for Barbara and me. And thank you all for coming, and to all those who made this marvelous museum possible, we thank you especially, and we're glad to be here. God bless America, and thank you very much.
Good job. Too long?
Ladies and gentlemen, President Bill Clinton.
Thank you very much, President and Mrs. Bush, and President and Mrs. Obama, President and Mrs. Carter, all the representatives here of the other previous presidents, the Ford, Nixon, Johnson families. I told President Obama that this was the latest, grandest example of the eternal struggle of former presidents to rewrite history. And I want to take my hat off to President Bush. This is a beautiful library. The exhibits are great. The work of the Bush Institute is inspiring. And I congratulate him on the Platinum Leads rating for his library. I think this is the second building in the entire federal system that has it. And I want to say, Mr. President, once again, you got the better of me twice in the last few weeks. My library has a Platinum Leads rating, but it was open for a few years before we could afford to achieve it. And you beat me to be a grandfather. And I congratulate you and Laura for it. You know, starting with my work with President George H.W. Bush on the tsunami and the aftermath of Katrina, people began to joke that I was getting so close to the Bush family I had become the black sheep son. My mother told me not to talk too long today. And Barbara, I will not let you down. There is one other connection I have that I think is largely unknown, which is that a couple of times a year in his second term, George Bush would call me just to talk politics. And a chill went up and down my spine when Laura said that all their records were digitized. Dear God, I hope there's no record of those conversations in this vast and beautiful building. I want to say, as President Carter did, I was impressed that President Bush invites us to make different decisions if we choose on the decisions he was facing. It's one of the most interesting things about this library. I want to talk about a couple of other things that are beyond controversy. First, I want to thank President Bush for passing PEPFAR. No president of my party could have passed that through the Congress. And I work all over Africa with our